little bit about me. Yeah, it's amazing. I know. I hardly recognize myself. No, it's not ZZ Top, John. Wrong era. Okay, I started teaching in the university in 1971, which is when this picture was taken. I was 24 years old. The radical critique of bourgeois education that was created by Paulo Freire was in its brief moment of ideological hegemony. And it wasn't really hegemonic. It was the alternative to the hegemony that most of us were fighting against in all kinds of different ways. Everybody I knew had read Freire. Everybody I knew thought that it was the most important thing that they had ever seen. None of us were teachers. None of us were teacher trainees. So this radical critique extended well beyond the schools of education. It was part of the air that social science people breathed in 1971. What Freire suggested was that assessment was an instrument of oppression. And therefore, the less of it, the better. There was no such thing as authentic assessment, a word, a concept that, as far as I knew, didn't exist, since assessment was always done by a superordinate to a subordinate. And therefore, assessment was always a top-down exercise. This critical pedagogy, which had a kind of strange relationship to other political streams of that moment, insisted that the best assessment was no assessment. And then something happened. I left the United States in 1975, and I spent 15 years in England. I came back for a couple of years, yes, in Casablanca. And then I left again in 1991 for my first IB teaching position at this wonderful school in Casablanca. Unlike at university, where my judgment as the professor was very rarely questioned, in high school, I found every assessment decision had to be justified. It was at that precise moment in my first year of high school teaching that I began to realize that there was more to assessment than I had anticipated. And that the Zen exercise of coming up with grades based on some subjective understanding of what students were doing was in fact probably not the best way. The advantages of thinking through one's marks rather than conjuring them from the cloud of student unknowing became obvious. It was an epiphany, and it's one that has transformed the way I look at the entire teaching process. I've discovered that distinction, which I think is vital, is much easier to make online. And what that means is that we are much more likely to both improve the work that we are receiving, that the student is producing, and encourage some emotional maturity. Thank you, Zena. I really appreciate that. It's I've used it in any number of different circumstances. Because I really do think that if students don't learn this in high school, they will never be able to succeed in the kinds of serious academic environments for which we think we're preparing them. I think this is an absolutely critical aspect of what teaching is all about. The desired results of assessment, the emotional maturity, and the improvement of work can only be achieved online through prompt, frequent, and seriously considered feedback. And again, there are significant differences between feedback face-to-face and feedback online. The online world, if it is used in what I think is an appropriate way, can be one of those anchors where students separated from the whole personal baggage that I've been talking about can find a source of security and recognition in the work that they produce. That focuses their attention on that work and helps them grow. We cannot change the conditions of the modern world, but our online practice can try not to make it worse than it already is.